Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining our weekly podcast. I'm Robin Lewis, founder and CEO of the Robin Report, which, by the way, is much more than a daily report. It's really a knowledge platform, as we view it, from which we communicate thought leadership on various strategic topics through the reports, but also these podcasts. And we do webinars and hopefully in the future, live events. Anyway, along with our chief strategist, Shelley Kohan, also a professor at FIT and Syracuse University, we welcome you to our conversation today, the topic of which is give the customer data back to, well, the customer. I'm not trying to be clever here, but Shelley, this is an incredibly timely and powerful topic today, and one that most of our readers and listeners might find a little off mission for the Robin Report, but it really isn't, which will be made very clear as we bring our guest, Ismail Amla, EVP Professional Services for the NCR Corporation. And he's also a co-author of the book, From Incremental to Exponential, How Large Companies Can See the Future and Rethink Innovation. Wow, what a great idea that is. Seriously, seriously, I'm being a little sarcastic, I guess, because, Shelley, we know that too many of our large companies can't get past incremental.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, in the book, Ismail talks about how the top level executives in these mega companies are really focused on maintaining the status quo and reducing risk. Well, you got that right. When what they should be doing is exactly the opposite. Innovation is fed from taking risks and driving change. Shelley, you and I have been talking about how these big companies are really getting a run for their money from the digital native brands and the influx of the entrepreneurial startups that have been swarming the industry. Why? Because they are risk takers and innovators. But today we're gonna focus on a real paradigm shift for the industry, which is giving control of customer data back to the customer. So, Ismail, can you please give us a summary about this idea, which, by the way, is very intriguing?
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you, Robin and Shelley, for having me today. You talked about innovation there, and we know that the fuel for all or a lot of innovation is the amount of data that we now have available. And really, this idea centers around data. So we're all on the internet, and the personal data we give away for free is often transformed into a precious commodity. So we know that we've got photos of puppies that we upload, and that trains the computer to be smarter to understand what a puppy is. The question we ask Google will uncover what humanity is thinking about. Our location histories tell investors which stores will attract the most shoppers. Even the smallest activities like staying in and watching a movie generates mountains of information. And this information is really treasure that's scooped up by businesses of all kinds to then target offers with you. So if I can give an example, if you think about what happens when someone sends a vial of saliva to 23andMe, and that's the ancestry company that we've all come across. Now we know that we're sharing our DNA. It goes to a genomics company, but what we may not realize is that it's likely to be resold to pharmaceutical firms. And then we've got many apps will ask you, are you okay that this app is using your location? And then we're being served up very, very custom advertisement based on who we are and where we are. But again, what we might not know is that location data may also be provided to a hedge fund for them to understand what store we're going to frequent the most. So there's all sorts of stuff that's going on with the data. Some we know about, some we don't know about. And in each of these scenarios, the user is receiving something in return for allowing a corporation to monetize their data. So, I get to learn about my genetic ancestry. I get to use a mobile app. I get to browse the latest footwear trends from the comfort of my computer. And this is the same sort of bargain Facebook and Google offer. So the core products that we've all got used to using, Instagram, Messenger, Gmail, Google Maps, all of them are free, right? Well, they don't cost money, that's for sure, but we pay with our personal data. And that personal data is used to target us with ads. So when we start talking about the shopper, which is what the idea is around, right, in the retail industry, the shoppers, for our part, have little insight or control about how our data is used. But I think what's happening is that a host of trends are coming together to challenge this old hierarchy of centralized data control and the lack of customer agency, lack of me being able to control my own data. And what's happening, and we're amongst them, companies and researchers are arguing it's not enough just for governments to simply protect personal data. I think consumers need to own their own information and be compensated when it's used. Now, we've already seen examples of this, the social networks like Minds and Steemit, and they're experimenting with rewarding users with cryptocurrency when they share content or spend time using their platforms. And other companies will pay you in exchange for sharing data, your banking transactions, for example. But I think that the core of the idea is that the retail industry needs to reset the way customer data is treated. Retailers and customers can benefit if the control and ownership of that data is handed back to the customers.
Boy, it's a big idea, and it really is. Ismail, if NCR can solve one of what is really a growing pain point for customers, by protecting their privacy, but at the same time, I guess, allowing for heightened personalization, if it's used correctly anyway. And this would be a great contribution to the future of retail and the need for innovation within the large companies to come to terms with their core customers who continually change their behaviors, right? So the ability to very quickly understand these behaviors in real time, I think could be a big game changer.
Yeah, I think, Ismail, what you're saying is really provocative. I mean, today, data is being collected, as you mentioned, from a broad variety of sources and at such high velocity. And there's just mountains and mountains of data. So, and most of that data is really not synchronized across organizations. And I know there's been a lot of discussions about trying to have some, and there's actually been a little bit of movement, but there's been a lot of discussion about having unified commerce and all this synchronization and a one comprehensive view, but that's really shared within one organization. But this idea of putting the control of data back to the customer, it really seems a bit futuristic, letting them decide who, what, where, when, and how. But tell us, what are some of the host of trends that are coming together to challenge that old hierarchy of centralized data collection and lack of customer agency?
Yeah, it is a little bit futuristic, but I think we are on the journey there with some of the things like the European Union's GDPR legislation, California's CCPA mandate, which basically says that companies give customers more control of what data is retained and how it is used. So we're sort of on the step to what I'm talking about here, but you're quite right, we're not there yet. And then what we're seeing is that the technology is changing. That is also pushing us in that direction. So Web 3.0 is building an entirely new foundation for digital activity that includes the capability for smart contracts, which could be used to allow consumers to better control who can collect their data and how it could be used and how long they can store it even. And then you've got things like cloud computing, you've got 5G connectivity, you've got open source software, cheaper hardware. the cost and time required to deploy data collection and management infrastructure is plummeting. Now, with all of these sort of trends happening, Shelley, what's happening is that the retail technology providers are finding they can deliver more sophisticated data collection and handling capabilities as a service, as part of providing their service, with little or no upfront cost or capital required. And what we're finding is that retailers are becoming very digital savvy and very eager to benefit. That good customer actually can provide good customer data can allow them to provide a better experience using their brands. And what we're seeing is all sorts of startup, third-party intermediaries, people like us, NCR, who are part of the retail value chain, now wanting to play a part. So let me bring this to life a little bit. So let's say I am, here I'm in the UK. I'm a Sainsbury's shopper. Being a Sainsbury's shopper and collecting the data, the retailer not only knows how much I spend, you get that on your Amex statement, but they know at the SKU level what I've purchased. So they know I have bought children's school uniform. They know when I buy it, how frequently I buy it. And so using that data, if I give them permission to use that data, they could provide a better service to me, knowing that next year I'm going to need a school uniform for an 8-year-old. And there's 8 months to go, and they could help me save. And in helping me save, they could give me all sorts of various offers related to a child who's going to be 8 years next June. So there's all sorts of stuff you can do in providing embedded financial services and other services as part of the retail service. And I think a lot of trends are pushing it in that direction.
Ismail, I'm a little tech challenged, data challenged at my age. Anyway, so pardon my naivete, but to kind of simplify this for me and maybe some members of the audience, are you talking about companies like NCR must, I guess in essence, ask customers for permission to use specific parts of their data, how they are going to use it, and for how long? Is that a stupid question?
No, it's not a stupid question at all. And in fact, it's a very good question. And the thing to know is actually this has been creeping up on us. Today, there are 120 countries already engaged in some form of laws for data protection to ensure that citizens and their data are offered more rigorous protection and control. And this would include asking about consent, asking about what I can do with that data, ensuring that there's integrity and security and enforcement. So in this example, we would be asking the consumer to say, I want to use your data. I'm going to use it in this way. One scenario might be to say that if you allow me to use your data, I will make sure that we provide offers relevant back to you. Or if you allow me to use your data, I will make sure that I connect you with merchants who are specifically interested in what you want. So yes, is the answer. We're going to ask for permission, but again, we're on a journey. This is just the next evolution, I think, of that journey.
Good. You cleared that up for me. So what you have described is a huge change to how data is being collected and utilized today. So can you tell us why the current state of fragmentation can't exist in perpetuity, and why the script needs to be, flipped now?
And I think the major reason the timing is now, and why I feel so confident this is going to happen, regardless of whether the retail industry supports it or not, is that the consumers will start to demand it. So the consumers already have a way that they interact with the other brands. And they're beginning to interact, their expectation is now changing. So the technology is ready, bandwidth is cheap. The limit to what we can do is limited by our imagination, not the technology. So let me give you an example of things already happening in the retail industry. So shoppers at Get Go Cafe and Market in Fox Chapel, Pennsylvania, can pick up a coffee, snack foods, grab some toilet paper in a pinch. What they don't have to do is wait in line. The store is owned by US grocery chain Giant Eagle. It's running a checkout-free technology system from startup Grabanjo. And we're beginning to see a lot of this checkout-free technology across a lot of the retail industry, where shoppers download a free mobile app and payment data. As they shop, they throw things in the basket, and a system of cameras add their purchases to a running tab. When they're done, the shopper scans a code generated in the app prior to leaving. Now, this system, in effect, reduces the shopping trip to data. It's all about the data. This system can not only identify what's going into the basket, but also monitor shopper activities to understand intent and interest by seeing, where do they stop? What are they spending time? What are they looking at? And this is a logical end, I guess, of a state of a trend towards capturing as much data as possible about our shopping activities, which we know is not new, right? Amazon, Google, massive retailers like Walmart and Target have been doing that for some time. And what we're finding is that there's dozens of startups like Grabanjo who are making advanced collection of customer data viable and cost effective. So it's not about lots of upfront spend. And they're doing it for a broader range of retailers, allowing them to bridge the physical and digital world. And this bridge has really been the holy grail of the big brand and the powerful retailers. I mean, a key reason why Amazon purchased grocer Whole Foods was to build this bridge and create more complete data pictures, of the habits and likes of shoppers and so on. And I think in the not so distant future, it's almost inevitable that all major point of sale and retail technology vendors will deliver this type of bridge technology or functionality as a service for an affordable monthly rate, so that the retail industry can absorb it. And I think that this again will result in more data. And more data, which will allow the retailers to react with very, very much more customized offerings.
So just to clarify, so this whole idea of, you're really talking about decentralized data, and that data is going to be owned by a group of brands, and these brands have kind of been, quote unquote, approved by the customer to have their information. I almost feel like I'm headed to the metaverse, because everything in the metaverse is decentralized, but that's not a good thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, all conversations lead back to the metaverse right now, don't they?
Yeah.
Well, day one is not the metaverse, but it is true that, retailers will look to track the individual's interests in a much more intimate manner, right? And that data will be held in a decentralized manner. And the permission will be provided by the individual, and the holder of the data will have the responsibility to look after it. So absolutely. And as I say, I think we're sort of in that direction anyway. But as we move, you mentioned the metaverse, Shelley. So as we move towards the metaverse, I mean, I think it gets really interesting, because companies will be able to monitor physiological responses. This is your eye diluted when I look at something. You get excited. Facial expressions, vocal inflections, and then react in real time to what individuals are feeling about a particular product. But I think, I know it's a scary thought, right? I mean, this is
it's crazy.
It is, and I think there's already some papers written on how this regulation needs to develop surrounding the individual consent and what you can do with the transfer and collection of data. Because, I might be all right saying to a retailer, yes, use my data to give me offerings. I may not be all right sitting in a metaverse environment where people are checking my heart rate and my pulse. And, it's a very different world there, right?
Yeah, well, all that makes sense. Let's jump to the second trend, which is around this idea of collecting and using cohorts of data in a very aggregate way. So this feels like it would preserve, some customer concerns around data privacy, but may not provide enough information to actually build this highly personalized customer journey. And it most likely would need a substantial amount of data to really provide meaningful insights. So can you just take us through this idea of anonymous pool of customer cohort data?
Yeah, and a cohort, if I use the example I used earlier, I'm a parent shopping for children's school uniform. You can identify very quickly a cohort of parents of kids who are in secondary school, for example. And then the question is, how do we build trust with those clients and delight them on that shopping journey? And so customers would be asked to contribute their data and would be rewarded in some fashion, perhaps with discounts for school uniforms, perhaps with cash back on purchases. And their behavioral data would go into a pool that retailers could then query, and only at a certain level of granularity. So retailers interested in parents of kids in secondary school would go into that pool. And while this might prevent micro personalizations, they don't know it's Ismail Amla, but they know it's the parent of a school-going kid. It still affords retailers the ability to tailor offerings closely to specific shoppers, if the total number of shoppers contributing was sufficiently large. So Shelley, there's got to be a critical mass of data in here to make it worthwhile. Now, approaching the customer data from this tack more aggressively preserve the privacy and allay some of the fears that we all have about what happens to my data once somebody gets a hold of it. I think there's all sorts of crazy story about what happens to data, who gets to share it. And this is crucial because customers are waking up to the value of their privacy, local level, national level, government level, and we've got a big discussion going on in the UK around this as well, and what it means in terms of privacy regulations, and the retailers will be very aware of this. So on the one hand, me as an individual, I don't want everybody to know everything about me. On the other hand, if retailers can get access to the same data without stringent regulation, because it's cohort data, it works for them as well.
Yeah, boy, this is really very interesting, Ismail. But let me ask you this. Don't the big players have an advantage since they already have the data, don't they?
Yeah, I think if you remember when we first started talking about the internet and some of the applications in the internet, and we start talking about social media, we suddenly started using the word like, this democratizes everything. Suddenly, and what we're seeing here, I think, is an inflection point where for the retail sector, this may democratize everything for all retailers. So it is true that most retailers are at a massive disadvantage to organizations such as Google, Apple, PayPal. We know the largest retail brands, Walmart and Amazon, recognize the value of data and are leveraging the scale to grab as much as they can about customer behavior and intent information. We know Amazon handles nearly 50% of retail product searches online. Walmart is the world's largest retailer in dollar value, and it's really gained significant traction with its mobile app. And both are leveraging their traffic and reach to sell billions of dollars worth of online ads to merchants against product searches and customer browsing. In other words, most retailers, as you quite rightly say, operate as a disadvantage to giants of the field. But in this world where consumers want to own their data, they want to choose who they want to give the data to, they probably want a more personal relationship, there is an opportunity for retailers coming together and promoting a different system where customers own and control the data. And the advantages of scale would be somewhat muted, and other values would become more important. Trust, for example, might play a bigger role. I don't want to deal with Amazon or Walmart. I want to deal with Joe Blogs, who I've dealt with. And by flipping this paradigm, giving customers agency over their data, retailers might get a complete picture of shoppers without violating their privacy or requiring uncomfortable data collection activities.
Wow, that is super interesting, Ismail. You may not be aware, but I spent almost 10 years working in the space of in-store analytics, and the data was being collected by single retailers and shopping behaviors by day of week and time of day. But there were capabilities for retailers to have data that could be pulled and applied about shopping behaviors outside that single retailer, like cross shopping as an example. But the retailers really never fully utilize the capabilities or the full potential of this type of data. Maybe it was too much data, maybe it wasn't easily actionable, or other reasons. So I'm really anxious to hear about this idea of data brokerages and kind of how this may work.
Yeah, and I think if you think about data brokerage, it's worth looking quickly, historically, that data brokers have not always worked in the interest of the consumer. You will know, Shelley, that, firms compile info from publicly available sources like property records, marriage licenses, court cases. They may even get access to medical records, browsing history that we give it, online purchasing. And depending where you live, brokers even purchase information from Department of Motor Vehicles and so on. And then retailers sell information to the data brokers. And these data brokers historically, actually quite often out of date, inaccurate, but still incredibly valuable to corporations and the sort of consumers you talked about, Shelley, because it's 80% right. You get a lot of information. But I think a couple of things happened. Why did retailers not take advantage of it? One is, I think, the barriers to using that data has shifted tremendously over the last 5 years. The computing power, the storage, the cheapness of the storage, the bandwidth, the ability to not only extract massive amounts of data, but then get the computer to make sense of it through machine learning and AI and so on. And so, that's happened. And then the second thing that happened is, I think the retailers have only just started to realize the power of it. If you've got SKU level data for an individual over a long period of time, you've really got gold on your hands. And I think the opportunity is for data brokers to put customers first and provide greater value to retailers. So I think, talking about what the approach that we're taking at NCR, we're positioned, we think, to not only pool the data in anonymous cohorts, but create machine learning and data modeling engines which enable retailers to mix and match the data sources and test out scenarios to look at novel ways to optimize their product offerings and customer experiences. Every time you go to fill up your car, are you going to buy a cup of coffee? What does the data tell us? If you were passing a Starbucks, how far away would you have to be to get a ping to get you to stop and buy a cup of coffee? So there's some really interesting data that I think you can put one and one together to get three. Yeah. And I think this sort of data will really allow retailers to meet the wishes of the consumer. The consumers are saying, this is the sort of thing I'm interested in, and would allow retailers to tap into a broader pool of analytical talent and services to make better decisions, while also affording the customers the additional rewards without sacrificing privacy.
Yeah. Boy, this is a whole new thing. I mean, it's fantastic. Anyway, it kind of moving towards closing this session. To clarify, Ismail, NCR and other such companies have the capability to make your truly visionary model happen, right? But does there first have to be some kind of government mandate on privacy regulations or standards? I realize some regulations exist today, but when you talk about standardization, who is the gatekeeper? Also, I guess more importantly, is the customer ready for this type of agency, as you call it? Can you share any information around consumer readiness of controlling their own destiny with data?
Yeah, sure. And I don't think there's a need for regulation if one retailer wants to have this relationship with their consumer and ask them for permission and then make offers available to that permission. I think the interesting thing happens when the consumer says, actually, I want to own the data from all the retailers that I work with, and I want to share the data across retailers. So when I go to Walmart, I want CVS to know where I shopped at Walmart, because it's my data. It's not Walmart's data. That is what might need regulation, right? But the first part doesn't need regulation. And in terms of the levels of protection, I think the focus, I think, Flip, is on how do you build the trust of the consumer. And we have regulation, and I think the regulation journey, the regulation often tracks innovation, as you know, so lags innovation. And I think we'll see that as well. We have the practices of the brokers who themselves have to position themselves as having security and integrity. And then we have the rights of the consumer to remove consent at any time. And so I think there's multiple levels of protections. And I think the consumers are getting pretty savvy about what it means to giving consent and sharing data. Now, there is actually a real case example sitting in Europe of something that's happened over the last 3 or 4 years, which is around open banking, which is a similar sort of idea that I've been talking about with open retail. And that is now regulation in Europe. So customers have the option to share information about how they operate their bank account with organizations that will, they're focused on delivering data and customer experiences. The customer decides whether I want to share bank information from one bank to another bank, just like a retailer. At the moment, the UK's 9 largest banks and building societies are required to make their data available through open banking. So this legislation is coming. It's here. It's in practice in financial services. And more than 2.5 million people are using open banking to move, manage, and make the most of them of their data. So I think there's a great opportunity. I think the trust levels will continue to develop. I think the technology is there. And in answer to your question, there may be regulation needed, but other industries seems to have addressed that issue.
Okay, yeah. So, well, Ismail, this has been a fascinating and truly a great learning session. It's certainly for me, and I'm sure a lot of our audience out there. And it seems to me that with the tech capability of NCR, not only would customer information be owned and controlled by the customer, thus preserving privacy, but on the retail side, they would be much better equipped to, give the customer what they want. So, and that's much closer to personalization, which we've been talking about ad nauseum. Anyway, but thank you so much. It's been very enlightening.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Ismail, it's great to have you on. Thank you so much. Yeah. Where can our listeners find you if they want to reach out?
I'm on Twitter, Ismail Amla, or on LinkedIn, again, Ismail Amla. Would be great to connect with people who are thinking about this subject.
That's great. I'm fascinated by it. I think you're ahead of everyone else right now. So yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, listeners. You can find more of our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Buzzsprout, and of course, therobinreport.com. Look for us on YouTube, where we broadcast our podcast as well. And please follow us on social media, link in with us, and follow us on Twitter for the latest thoughts about the industry.
And I want to thank all of you again for joining us. And Ismail, thanks to you again. And as I do every week, if any of you have topics that you would like Shelley and I cover at some point, just send me an email, and that would be to robin@therobinreport.com. And thanks again.